This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter, something procedural, something that only becomes visible when it's already been used. For a long time, federal power worked because it pretended not to notice who you voted for. Money moved. Rules applied. The system stayed boring. That boredom was the point. What changed is not a law, not a vote, not a headline. What changed is the idea that neutrality is optional, that loyalty can be measured, and that punishment does not need to be announced to be effective. If this sounds abstract, stay with me, because abstraction is how this survives. By the end of this, you'll see why billions can disappear without being stolen, why entire regions can be disciplined without a single speech, and why this only works if you stop watching before the mechanism comes into view. Don't. What actually controls the system right now is not ideology, not policy, not even elections. It's access. Access to money that has already been approved, access to permits already issued, access to programs that are supposed to operate automatically, without emotion, without memory. That's the quiet center of gravity. Once Congress allocates funds, the system is designed to go on rails. No favoritism, no punishment, just execution. But that assumption only holds if execution is neutral. What happens when execution becomes discretionary? When the question shifts from, is this legal, to who deserves it? Power doesn't need to pass a new law to change outcomes. It only needs to pause, delay, redirect. And because this happens inside agencies, inside processes most people never see, it feels invisible until it doesn't. Because when access becomes conditional, the system stops being federal. It becomes relational, transactional. And once that switch flips, every program becomes leverage. That's where this starts to accelerate. And where the damage stops being theoretical, this didn't happen all at once. That's the part people miss. There was a before, when federal funding moved the same way weather does, predictable, impersonal, indifferent to who was in power. And then there is now. Nothing is formally canceled. Nothing is loudly denied. Things just slow down or quietly disappear from the schedule. The most dangerous changes never announce themselves as change. They arrive as exceptions, as reviews, as temporary pauses. Over time, those pauses teach a lesson. They teach states, they teach agencies, they teach organizations compliance is faster than resistance. Silence is safer than objection. And because each instance looks technical, isolated, justifiable on paper, no single moment feels like a crisis. There is no alarm, but the cumulative effect is not subtle. A system designed to treat everyone the same begins to remember. It remembers who aligns and who doesn't. That memory is the shift. And once the system learns how to remember, it doesn't forget. That's when the first shock lands. Not as an accident, but as a signal. Then the money didn't just slow, it was pulled back. Not because projects failed, not because budgets collapsed, not because priorities changed, but because maps did. Billions of dollars already approved for energy projects were suddenly marked for removal. Not everywhere, not evenly. Only in certain places, places that had voted the wrong way. This wasn't hidden. It wasn't implied. It was acknowledged. Funding would remain where loyalty existed and disappear where it didn't. That's the moment the abstraction breaks. Because this wasn't about energy policy or climate strategy or efficiency. It was about using federal capital as a disciplinary tool. The message wasn't sent through speeches. It was sent through spreadsheets. And here's the part that matters. If this had worked, nothing else would have needed to change. No laws, no elections, no crackdowns, just selective enforcement of what already exists. The system didn't collapse. It revealed a new use. And just as that realization set in, something intervened, not to explain it, not to fix it, but to stop it for now. Here's how it actually works. Federal programs don't fail loudly. They fail through discretion. A signature delayed, a review extended, a condition added that wasn't there before. On paper, everything still exists. The law, the funding, the authorization, but in practice, access becomes negotiable. The people who benefit from this are not voters. They are not even politicians. They are the ones who decide when a process is complete. Who determines whether a requirement has been satisfied? Who can say yes tomorrow instead of today? The damage doesn't land where the decision is made. It travels, it lands on states budgeting for projects that never start, on workers hired for jobs that vanish, on communities told to wait indefinitely. And because nothing is officially denied, there is no single villain, just a system absorbing pressure downward. This is why retaliation scales so efficiently. It doesn't need force. It needs patience. And once institutions learn that patience can be weaponized, they start looking for the next place to apply it. That's when the resistance begins to harden. And when the second shock hits faster than the first, then it stopped being abstract again. Not a program, a project. A single piece of infrastructure was told to shut down, midstream, mid-investment, no gradual delay, no quiet pause, just stop. Capital already committed, jobs already planned, timelines already locked, and suddenly, none of that mattered. The justification didn't hold. It didn't need to, because the point wasn't regulation, it was demonstration. This is what happens when you're on the wrong side of the map. If this move had stood, the signal would have been unmistakable, not just to that project. To every developer watching, every investor calculating risk, every state deciding whether to push forward or pull back, the chilling effect would have done the rest. No bans required. No speeches delivered. Just one example. And then another interruption. Not from voters. Not from markets. From a branch of government that rarely moves quickly, but did, and by moving, exposed something worse. Because if this had to be stopped twice, it means it will be tried again. Faster, smarter, somewhere else. Here's where this reaches you. Not as a theory, not as a case study, as a bill you didn't expect. A service that quietly disappears. A wait list that never ends. When funding becomes conditional, the impact is never abstract. It's measured in childcare slots that vanish, in health programs that stall, in assistance that stops without explanation. You don't get a letter saying this is punishment. You get told there's a delay, a review, a restructuring, and you're expected to absorb it. If you live in a place marked as disfavored, the system doesn't argue with you. It just slows down around you. You adjust your plans, your work, your family. This is how pressure works when it wants to look neutral. And this is the part people underestimate. Because once pain is distributed quietly, it doesn't look like coercion. It looks like bad luck. If this feels familiar, that's not an accident. Stay with me. Because what happens next is what turns this from a domestic tactic into something much larger. This doesn't stay contained. Systems like this never do. Because once federal power proves it can reward and punish internally, the signal travels outward. Investors notice, allies notice, other governments notice. What was once predictable becomes contingent. Projects that rely on federal partnerships start to look unstable. Long-term planning starts to feel naive. Risk calculations change not because the laws changed, but because enforcement did. And that uncertainty doesn't respect borders. When infrastructure slows in one place, supply chains shift elsewhere. When research funding becomes volatile, talent moves. When governance looks transactional, credibility erodes. This is how a domestic tactic becomes a global variable. Quietly, without an announcement. And the danger here isn't collapse, it's drift. A slow recalibration where everyone assumes instability is normal and plans around it Where the system still functions, but no longer anchors, that's harder to see, harder to reverse. And it leaves one question hanging. If this is what restraint looks like now, what happens when restraint is no longer required? From here, there are three paths. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. The system absorbs the pressure. Courts intervene when lines are crossed. Congress pushes back when costs rise. Nothing breaks. But nothing returns to neutral either. In this path, everyone learns to operate defensively. Programs survive, but cautiously. Decisions are slower. Risk is priced in. The system works, but it flinches. The second path is erosion, not through a single defeat, but through repetition. Each blocked action teaches the next one how to avoid detection. Punishment becomes subtler. Delays become longer. Retaliation becomes procedural. Nothing illegal enough to stop, nothing blatant enough to mobilize, just constant pressure. And then there's rupture. Not necessarily dramatic, not tanks or shutdowns, but a moment when a court doesn't act fast enough, or Congress doesn't hold, or the damage lands before anyone can reverse it. In that path, precedent changes quietly. And once it does, it doesn't snap back. The system hasn't chosen yet, but it's moving. And what determines the direction is not intent, it's tolerance. This is not a story with a clean resolution, because the most important question here is still unanswered. Not whether the system can stop this. It has sometimes. The question is how often it will have to. A government that learns it can punish quietly doesn't need to win every time. It only needs to keep trying, to keep testing, to keep finding the edge of what will be tolerated. And every intervention, every court order, every rebuke does something else too. It teaches the next attempt how to be less visible. That's the unresolved danger. Not collapse, not dictatorship, but normalization, a future where access depends on alignment, where neutrality is treated as defiance, where the absence of crisis is mistaken for stability. If you're waiting for the moment this becomes obvious, you'll miss it. Because systems like this don't announce when they cross the line. They just keep operating differently. And the only way to see that change is to keep watching it closer. That's what we'll do next.